Welcome to a special edition of Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and today we are here to talk about a heavily impactful decision that was made here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, about shutting down the Ontario Science Centre, an absolutely remarkable institution of both Ontario and the country. Today I have with me from Moriyama Teshima Architects, I have Brian Rudy. Brian, thank you for joining.
My pleasure.
So I had read the press last week. Obviously, everyone saw the press last week and was blown away at the decision of the provincial government based on an engineering report that they decided they wanted to manipulate for their own purposes. And I was, as a Toronto resident, my whole life appalled at what I read. And having working in the construction industry, I understand what an engineering report is. Ray designed this place at the age of 29.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I think it was actually in his 30s, but you could be right. We'll have to get that. We'll have to check the math on that.
So when I was looking at this, I think the place was built. It was built started construction in 1966.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And I think the math was he was around 29 years old.
You could be right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why I bring this up, okay, just to start, is to think about the magnitude of handing the design and architecture over to a 29-year-old to design what will now is considered to be one of the most heavily traveled government institutions in public space that exists in Canada. Probably among the globe.
It's that decision to hand this project to Raymond was, at once inspired and at kind of the same time crazy foolish, right? Like, how do you know? Ray can deliver. You don't. He's got one building and a couple of pavilions under his belt. He's done modest work so far.
Right.
Beautiful work, but modest, very modest. This is an entirely different scale.
Right. And you were telling me just prior to our beginning of this podcast is that you started with the company just over 20 years ago, and you had worked with Ray, and so you understood him as an individual and what he had created with Ted, and the importance of this, and the projects that you took on. So he goes and he creates the space, and for anyone that is unfamiliar with what the Science Centre is here in Ontario, it is actually, you know what? I'm not going to describe it. Brian, why don't you describe what the Science Centre is?
Well, I can give you the textbook answer. I mean, it was a Centennial Project.
Yep.
And I don't know what the list of Centennial Projects is, but I know they were all grand vision projects, right? They were at a kind of optimistic time in our history, an excited time. Canada wanted to brag to the world, so they thought big, and there's nothing wrong with that. The Science Centre was the first of its kind, arguably, in the world. I think there was one other institution in San Francisco area that was doing something similar, which was thinking about hands-on science exhibits, like education through hands-on learning. This had never been done before. And so Raymond and the group of politicians and project managers that were leading it came up with that as the vision. And again, this was untested waters. So Raymond, as I said, coming off of his little gazebos and his wonderful little Japanese Canadian Cultural Center building, put his head to this, and I think drew everything he could think of and everything he kind of imagined in his life becoming an architect, pulled it all together and made this building on the spectacular ravine site of Toronto that kind of captures his childhood in a way. And I can tell you that story a little bit, but because he's told us the story so many times.
Yeah.
But the Science Centre it's a building that it's actually not a building, it's a series of buildings.
Yes.
And it cascades down and across and down and into the ravine.
Yes.
And back up again in this sort of series of jumps. through either bridges or kind of escalators. And in so doing, it kind of reveals the valley and the landscape and nature and greenery to the visitor. And it says to the visitor that nature is part of science. In fact, nature is science.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what you learn. And I mean, that was such a simple idea, but everyone got it. Everyone that I've talked to, even in the last couple of weeks when this whole thing blew up, everyone got that. Everyone was so connected to that story about walking, across this bridge, experiencing the treetops, looking down into the valley, understanding that you're leaving a piece of land and getting to some other place. And then from there, descending this long escalator and seeing the trees and the grasses. So you see the tops of the trees in one moment, and the next moment you're seeing the bottoms of them and the blades of grass going by.
And if you've not been here, you have to understand that the way in which the windows are positioned along the escalators, as it goes with most intellectual architects, it is all positioned to be able to provide you with that experience as if you are going through a treehouse and you're going up and down the treehouse.
So I'm glad you said treehouse, and I didn't have to say it. But Raymond had a treehouse story that he told. He drove us crazy with it because he told it all the time. But I mean, it was, obviously it was a moving story to him. So you probably know, a lot of people probably know his story. He was interned during the Second World War as a child. As a Japanese Canadian, to an intern camp in the kind of interior of BC, deep in the woods, in the forest, in the kind of wilderness, basically. They were put, him and his family, in this intern camp, and his escape was a treehouse that he built for himself. And that was obviously a moving experience for him to kind of live in a tree, live with nature. That stuck with him for his whole life. And he talks about it as a story that made him want to be an architect in a lot of ways. So the connection to nature obviously was so important to him that his architecture had to express it somehow. And that's I think of any one lesson we learned from Raymond, that's the one, is the connection to nature between us as people and between the buildings we live in. That's probably the single most powerful lesson that we've taken. So we try to do that whenever we can.
Yeah, and the practice has really focused on schools, large institutional work. I know that there's other work that moves through the practice, but it has always been, I think, a large part, right?
Educational, yes.
Educational architecture.
Yeah,
and that it's a niche market. But it's also a market that if you do it very well, there's education happening all over the place. This facility, to anyone unfamiliar with Toronto is largely a ravine city. There are ravines throughout all of Toronto in every different neighborhood. There are underground streams. There are a lot of associated engineering complexities to building in Toronto. You have clay in some areas, sand in others. You have all four climates, and you have extremes of all four climates. In summers, it can hit 45 degrees Celsius with humidex, and in winters, it can be -30, -35. So being able to both come up with a concept of the architecture to make it as impactful as what it is, to place it in a position that it's in, to be able to provide people with an understanding of the landscape of the city, and then also to be able to do it in a way that the material really resonates and connects with the experience, is something that I think every single child and adult now that was a child and experienced this place completely embodies inner fibers.
Right.
If you grew up in Toronto, you've been to the Science Center.
Oh, if you live in southwestern Ontario, you've been to the Science Center, right? I mean, my wife grew up in Leamington near Windsor, and they all came regularly, probably 5 or 6 times in their, public and high school, on the bus. I mean, that's a story I'm sure everyone shares, right?
Yeah.
And then growing into an adult, you bring your kids, so you experience it all over again in a different way.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of there's another element of that connection to nature that I wanted to talk about too, and I think it started with the Science Center. The connection isn't just a physical, a kind of visual one. It's a real desire to connect to nature through a kind of, and this is before sustainability was a word, through a environmentally sustainable or responsible, is probably a better word, way. And so using resources wisely, doing things in your building that encourage not just environmental sustainability and responsibility, but our responsibility to each other as humans. And again, that grew up directly out of his internment experience, I'm sure, right? The fact that his family was, humiliated and imprisoned in such a way meant that he grew up thinking that democracy has to reign and people have to all have a say in the society they build together. So all of that is connected. And I'll bring it back to people respecting each other in a democracy. We make decisions about our spaces that we build as architects, and those spaces have to accommodate every learning style,
Right.
every conversational style.
Yep.
And so we've taken all of those pieces into our architecture, starting with Raymond and Ted. That's so we've learned a lot about how to design public spaces that can accommodate all of those different styles, because you have to, and especially in such a multicultural society.
Right. So let's say we fast forward right now, okay, and we get to the point where the engineering report comes out.
That's a big fast forward. But
I know,
sure.
I know. And the only reason I'm doing it is because I do think that it's worth understanding in a form of layman terms. You read engineer reports all day long for your work. The majority of the public doesn't, and most people that don't are generally overwhelmed by the concept of reading something that they feel they don't understand, despite the fact that they probably could understand it. What is it about the engineering report that some people may not agree with?
Actually, the engineering report's pretty straight up, and it describes a very methodical approach to fixing this building. It doesn't in any way or at any point say, "Oh, we've got to shut this building down. We've got to get everyone out of here." It doesn't do that.
Oh, so okay. Well, isn't that interesting?
Oh no, it doesn't do that at all.
For what it's worth, I knew that. I just wanted to debunk that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely not what it says. To their credit, Rimkus laid out the facts as they saw them. They did actually a very detailed report. So they just went through. Okay, let's back it up a bit.
Sure.
So there's this thing called rack.
Yep.
It's a concrete panel, and they use them for all kinds of. Used to use them for lots of different things, but in this case, they used them for a roof.
Okay.
And they're just planks essentially. Think of a big plank of wood. They're bigger than that. They're like half a meter by whatever, a couple of meter span. Yep. And they hold up the roof, and they hold out the weather. So they're a structural element in this building, but they don't. The entire building is not covered in these. Only parts of the building. It's about 59%. Less than 60% of the building is these panels.
Okay.
Of that 60% of the roof, the report identified about 2.5%. I'll bring up my stats here.
Yeah.
2.5% of it as being in kind of high or critical risk situation. And those are the panels that they said, okay, we got to replace those right away. Some of the ones that are critical, they've already shored up. They've already done the work.
Okay.
How many panels are critical? I'll tell you. Guess. Take a guess. How many in the entire building are critical?
How many panels did we say are?
Yeah, how many panels are in
No, how many panels exist in the building?
Oh.
That are of a risk?
Yeah.
The 60%? What is it? Are we saying, let's say there's 60 of them?
No, there's 6.
6 in total?
6 that are critical.
6.
Not 16, not 66. And then there's another, so of a total of 2.5%
okay,
that are either critical or high risk. Yeah. So 2.5%, I don't even know how many, there's thousands of these panels in the building. 2.5% of them are in shape, bad enough shape that they need to be replaced soon, like this year.
Yeah.
According to the report.
Yeah. But again, that number is 6.
Six panels is how many are in critical.
Correct. Yeah.
So if you add critical and high risk,
Yeah.
then it's probably more. I don't know what it is.
It doesn't matter.
It's 2.5%.
I know, but
but
I
six,
wanted to go keep saying the word 6.
That's right.
It's not. It's
yeah.
not 5.
No,
okay, it's not 5,
7.
and it's not as many as 7.
No.
6 panels.
And those 6 panels have already been, so I understand it, kind of shored up and secured in place. And then there's a bunch more that need to be replaced by October, so according to the report.
Yeah.
Now, what makes that even more funny, again, that's 2.5% of all of the panels. What makes that even funnier is that virtually none of those 2.5% of the panels are over top of public or exhibit space.
Okay, let's just say that one more time.
Let's soak that in.
In case you had to honk your horn while you're listening to this in a car right now.
So, of all of the panels that need to be replaced this year,
yes,
almost none of them, and I think I could count probably 20 in the report, that were over top of exhibit space or public space. The rest are not. So there's virtually none that are in kind of a dangerous position for the public. Now, of course, more than one is a problem. We don't want anyone to get hurt.
Of course.
So how do you fix that?
Yep.
You take those areas, which are very limited, as I said, over exhibit areas, very limited spaces, and you cordon them off like any building maintenance program would do.
Yep.
You cordon off that space, you do the work, you replace it, and you move on. So they probably don't want to do it that way because it's tedious and expensive probably. They want to do bigger sections and replace it all. So, okay, fine. You could do that too, but you're still into the same idea. You're cordoning off areas, very small areas within a very large building and fixing it. This is not. Does this sound familiar to you? I mean, every major institution does this on a regular basis. It's normal maintenance for any building. A friend of mine said, he said, if my roof started to leak the other day, would I move out of my house?
And tear it down.
So anyways, that's the scope we're talking about. And now I know that IO is going to come back and say, yeah, but we need to replace all of these panels, which represent 60% roughly of the building. Right. Okay, sure, yeah. Over the next 10 years.
Right.
When you do roofing replacements and stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the issue?
It's a great question. What is the issue? I mean, is it?
I don't know.
Is it to do with like development?
Oh, we don't want to go there, do we? Let's go there. I think politics aside, the simple matter of land use. So there's, again, I mentioned this valley condition of this building, right? It's one of the 3 buildings is on the top of the valley.
Yep.
There's one on a kind of berm.
Yep.
And then the other one's down in the valley.
Yep.
The only part of the site that you can develop is that tableland at the top of the ravine.
Right.
It's a very narrow strip along Don Mills. There's not a lot of land there compared to the whole project.
Right.
All of the rest of the land is owned by, all of the land is owned by the city and TRCA, managed by TRCA, the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority. So they're not going to let you build housing on that land. They may let you sneak a condo or 2 up on the tableland. But again, that's a tiny amount of land that's available. So that argument doesn't hold to me.
Right.
Frankly.
Yeah. I mean, in addition to that argument, you also have the argument that surrounding that area right now, you have a monster development happening on the northwest corner of Don Mills and Eglinton.
Yes, an absolute monster of many, many thousands
of units.
Yeah.
Right? You have, I think there's a proposed development on the northeast corner as well, where the Loblaw Superstore is, or am I I have to, I'll check that while we continue.
There's actually the big one northwest, southwest. There's also a big development on the north parking lot of
the Science Center. But there's also a development proposed on the east side. On the southeast
corner. Yes.
Right. So you're talking about an influx in one intersection of, I mean, what if I throw out numbers? Is it 50,000 people?
Could be.
Right?
There's a lot of new development, but it's obvious because this is now going to be a huge node in the city, right? Almost as powerful as Yonge and Bloor.
Right. And the reason for that
is because if the Eglinton Crosstown ever gets finished, which, in theory, it's being commissioned as we speak. It should be done this year.
We'll hold our breath.
We won't hold our breath, but and then in another 6 to 10 years, they're going to have the Ontario line coming in.
Yep.
We know that's coming, and lo and behold, the Science Center station, right where the building is. So the intersection of those two major new transit systems is going to be almost equal to Yonge and Bloor in terms of its node-like stature in the city. And what better thing to have at a node in a city than a major public institution like the Science Center?
And the concept of moving it south into what is now Ontario Place, where you have a lack of access.
Yes.
Right? Public connectivity to that space, as much as Ontario Place was at one point a very heavily populated destination, most people nowadays are driving less. They're the next generation of drivers are not getting their license.
Right. That's a good point.
So what people are doing is they're using ride sharing or they're using transit. Those are the two main methods of commuting nowadays. So, or going into the future. So if you were to take what is a massive institution, and they're going to talk about condensing it down into something smaller at this most southern part of the city that eliminates the potential for people that are coming from the north and from the east and from the west and having to then contribute to the traffic if they're driving on the Don Valley parking lot.
Yeah, this is the worst part of the city for traffic.
Right?
Bar none, right?
So, it makes no sense. And the other major thing in this, we talk about the magnitude of the buildings that the Science Center is, but as a child, when you come into the Science Center, and I will have images available on our Instagram that you can go look at to understand what the interior space looks like. But in terms of magnitude as a kid, if you go there on a school trip and your bus drops you off at the front and you walk in, you have this incredibly massive area in the first building, all color-coded, very easy to understand as a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old. If you got lost in an institution this big and you say, this is where we're going to meet, kids understand the color, most unless they're colorblind, but you say in this area, in this semicircle, it is so easy. The architecture is so meaningful to the basic comprehension of experience once you walk through those doors. You can't recreate this. You can't.
Well, what will go on the harbor front will be fundamentally different, right? But going back to transit for a second, you're right. It's not well connected. It's actually farther to walk considerably than to go to the Ontario line station.
Yeah.
It's much further. What's worse is that, again, let's go back to what the mandate is of the Science Center. It's actually more like a school than it is anything else. It's more like a school than a museum.
I was just going to go there next.
Exactly. It's an educational, it's an extension of our school system, actually, is what it is.
And by the way, with all of the development happening in that area, there has not been a proposal put forth by the Toronto School Board, Toronto District School Board, the Catholic District School Board. No school board exists where they're saying that we're going to put up schools in this area where we're about to put an influx of 50,000 people. So where are they going to go?
They're going to have to put some schools there, for sure. They will.
They're going to have to.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone that I know in development hasn't talked about anything about plans for the future. They're talking about busing people. So if they're there, sorry, go ahead.
Well, speaking of busing people, so that's what we've been talking to some ex-science, right? People that worked at the Science Center are now retired. That's a huge part of their. I think it's 25% of their traffic actually is school busing, buses to schools. And now they can, with transit, they'll be able to come by transit.
Yes.
It'll be even easier.
Yep.
But that's huge part of their visitorship. And so we've talked to these groups. We've also talked to some local activists in the Thorncliffe area, and they're saying they won't be able to afford to send buses down to that part of the city. They just won't.
No chance.
And it'll be too difficult to get in and out. The traffic is horrendous. It won't be accessible. And here's the accessible word again. In a democracy, we have to make everything accessible, especially our education.
Yeah. I mean, in a public institution, like, you need to wrap your arms around it. You got to hug this place, and coddle it, and allow it to nurture the next generation of inquisitive minds in the kids that are going to walk through there.
Right.
It is so backwards. So this report comes out, and there actually is an element about the report that I was referencing in a conversation prior to this, that my understanding is that there was a denotation within the report about the client making a request of something. I'll leave that alone, but I'll say that.
Okay. That I'm not sure.
And a revision.
Okay.
And a revision of the report.
Okay.
Client made a comment about something. Anyhow, I don't want to.
Oh, do tell. I may have missed that.
I don't want to go too. I don't want to go into that. But
okay.
Anyone that's interested, you can go potentially look at finding the revised report, and we'll leave that there. I'm trying to minimize my amount of journalism in this and keep it to more about the architecture and the community impact.
Right.
So I would say that one of the other major components of this is, and in some ways I think this is selfish for the architecture purposes. Okay. But you have to, and I say you as the collective you, okay? This is everyone. You have to protect important pieces of art, and you have to protect it for the youth that created it. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, we talked at the very beginning about Ray designing this. He's 29 years old and designing this. How many 29-year-olds in the world that have their architecture license get an opportunity to design an institution of this magnitude globally, anywhere?
Well, nowadays, exactly zero, I would say.
Right.
Of this magnitude, absolutely no one.
None.
Not anymore.
No, there's only a handful of architecture practices that are getting invited to be to the RFP process, right? Mm-hmm. And they have to have a history.
That's a really interesting point you say, because this was very much a kind of creation of a young architect and the mind of a young architect.
And the ambition. Yeah.
When we hire new staff straight out of school, I mean, they have such, ambition, I guess, maybe a hard word, but they have such energy and such insight that we don't have as an old crusty.
Don't downplay yourself like that.
Well, it's just true though. I mean, they have an energy that we can't match, right. And they bring something fresh and new. And so we, as a result, we always put young architects on all of our design projects.
Right.
Well, all of our projects are designed, but we, at the early stages, you want that kind of youth and energy, and then you want to continue to nurture that and give it experience so it can grow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that youth that Ray brought to it, I think, speaks in the building, right? It's there to be seen. And
experience. Like that's, you couldn't be 75 years old and design this. I don't think you could. And now I could be, if you're 75 and you're listening to this and you're an architect and you're amazing at what you do, I apologize.
Well, there's something there. But I think it hits on a bigger point, which is that what you said actually, is that you don't destroy your art as a society. Toronto wants to be a world-class city. It always has. It's got this sort of inferiority complex that it wants to get out of. And the way to do that, I think, is, if you look at any old cities, is you don't tear down your best works, your best pieces of your cities, meaning streetscapes, buildings, parks, whatever they may be, the most cherished, the most lovely, the most beautiful. You go, oh, we got it right here. Let's keep that. That we got right. Let's tear this other junk down and try to do that. And that's why you have beautiful cities that are 2,000 or more years old, like Rome, like Florence, like probably hundreds and thousands of other cities that have this deep history, and they've had enough time to get it right enough times in their history that they're now incredibly beautiful cities.
Right.
Why are they beautiful cities? Why is Toronto kind of a trashy city? Well, Toronto has a lot going for it, but it's young still.
Yep.
It's got a couple of gems in it, but they're kind of few and far between.
Yeah. Do you think that if there was an engineering report that said that the it's not called the Sky Dome anymore. I apologize. It's still that's just.
I still know it as the Sky Dome.
It's just in me.
Yeah.
But if the Rogers Center were to have a flaw in its overall, let's call it one of the sidewalls or the roof system,
Right?
Would they go and tear it down?
Well, you know what? That's interesting because they did talk about that a few years ago. Thank God they didn't, because now they did some renovations, which I haven't seen. I've heard it's now improved. That's exactly what you do. You say, you know what, this is such an amazing building, but it's not working in this way. Let's fix it. Let's make it better. So that's where I want to go with this discussion, because the Science Center was built for a different era, was built for a different site. It was a suburban site at the time. Mm-hmm. It's now rapidly becoming, as I mentioned, the node. It's becoming a major urban node in the city. Right. And so actually it's time to it's not time to knock it down. It's time to rethink it.
I was going to say it's an opportunity.
It's a huge opportunity. Yeah. And this is what we've been trying ever since last April, when we learned that they wanted to move the Science Center. Mm-hmm. We've been gathering the troops, friends, colleagues, design industry, engineering, and saying, how can we reimagine this? We actually hired an architect here, we talked about young architects. We hired a fresh architect out of school, and her thesis was on the Science Center.
Amazing. How
you could reimagine the Science Center in a new urban kind of context. And we loved it, and we hired her right away. And it was just like so natural. So we've been building up our stock and our inventory and our friend base.
I love it.
And we built a 3D model that we can work on now. We've done some, spitballing, some brainstorming.
Yeah.
We're still early days, but our goal is to reimagine this building in its new urban context.
I mean, I think the next closest likened project to this in our city, without having the report, and I could be wrong, maybe there was a report, but the ROM. You go take a look at the ROM, and the ROM was very much a similar institution. And what happened years ago was, let's go reinvent this.
Yeah. I actually think the AGO is even a better example, because it was sort of a series of add-ons and additions and expansions, and it continues to do that.
Yeah.
And it's a highly complex and difficult thing to do at that building, and it gets harder to do as you keep going. But you got to keep doing it, because it's such a it's one of those gems. It's one of the gems of the city, and you got to keep it. You got to keep all the pieces of it that make what it is now.
So what went into the release that you had a couple of days ago? Mm-hmm. Okay, the practice comes out. What was it 2 days ago?
It came Friday. Came out Friday.
Our piece
came out. Yeah,
your press release came out 2 days ago. Okay.
Yes.
If you are listening to this and you are unfamiliar with what the press release was, essentially, and this is what drove me to this conversation today. Moriyama Teshima has offered their services, their architectural services, pro bono to the province to work on the restoration of the Science Center. If you don't understand what that means, it means that you are no longer going to be charging fees to be able to work on the restoration of this. And when you think of fees, Brian just talked about a young associate that came on, or an intern architect that came on out of school that was inspired by this place. They're now working here. You would have a team of architects working on this project. And again, to reference what that would mean, you have a lot of people that are not being billed out for their time. Mm-hmm. And you're running a business, your business has to be sustainable. If you're doing things for free, your business is not sustainable. However, there are times in your business and in the evolution of a business where something of social impact means so much to the people that work at it, and to the community, and to the country at large, province at large, that you issue this statement. And I'm going to tell you that when I read this 2 days ago, I put my phone down and I actually had like tears in my eyes, because I can think of when I was a kid and what this place meant to me as a child, to watch my mom's hair stand up.
Right. Yeah. And you're not alone, right?
I'm not. I have been talking to multiple architecture practices, to friends and family. I haven't shared the fact that we were having this conversation today with everyone. Hopefully they'll listen to it afterwards. But this is like a critical moment in the province's history for the provincial government to not go down the path that they're talking about going down. The restoration needs to happen.
It has to happen. And it's, yeah, you're right. It's more than a restoration. It's a reinventation.
Yes.
So, as I said, we've been actually doing pro bono work already on that, right? We've been doing that work and building the models and getting ready for this. We're kind of toying with how we're going to roll that out, and maybe we'll make it a more public process where we invite people to come. But the point is, we've got to come up with some really powerful imagining of the future of this place, because it's not in, as I mentioned, it's not in the same part. It's not in the same conditions that it was. It needs to be rethought. How you do that, I don't know yet, but it's an exciting proposition. And I think if we imagine now, when we go down to the waterfront and imagine what's going to happen there, I think maybe that would be an interesting discussion too. I don't know if you want to go there, but that's we've looked at that site as well. It's a very constrained site. It's a very public site. So the challenge there will be how to weave what's essentially a paid admission institution into public space.
Right.
And how do you do that in a way that allows for enough interface between the building and the landscape that has an impact on your experience in the building?
Right.
I don't know. But the main problem there, I think, is just the site that the only site you have to build on is a very narrow piece of waterfront, kind of wedged in by roads, the Lakeshore Boulevard, the lake, and on the fourth side, a massive dragon, which is Thermae. I don't want to talk about that, but this massive spa building has the head of the dragon literally comes over and lands right next to where the science center is going.
It makes a lot of sense to have a spa down there. I can't even, like, it's farcical to even talk about that.
Well, let's not even go there. And literally the head of this thing is going to blow away or obliterate any kind of impact that the science center could have.
Right.
So it's going to be, no, don't get me wrong. You could do a public institution at the waterfront, and it'd be a completely good idea.
Yeah. Something different.
Something different. Yeah. Something you don't already have in the city. Yeah.
So I have a question. What can people do? What can the public do? What can people in business do to help remedy this issue right now?
There's all kinds of petitions being signed. They've all blown up over the past few days, as you can imagine. There's tens of thousands of people on one. There's another one that's over 50,000 by now. So that's make your voice known on those petitions and with your local MP.
Okay.
Or MPP, I guess it is.
And if people wanted to make donations towards the restoration of this, nothing's been formalized from my understanding yet, right?
There's no formal way to do that I know of, but there's, that the stories, there's a couple of
philanthropic people that have offered, $1 million donations, $500,000 donations.
That's right.
Yes.
Ironically, they've donated way more than it's required to do the job, but that's all good, because we'll need tons of money to rejuvenate this building. Right. If that's the way we're going to do it. If we're going to crowdfund this, then we've got a long way to go. Right. The other thing I want to talk about, though, is the numbers. The numbers that the government put out in their business plan are also highly erroneous, right?
You don't think it would cost 20 to 44 million?
I have the numbers.
Or 22?
Math is interesting. If they had a report done on the existing building, how much it would cost to repair. Their expert consultants told them it'd be about 142 million.
142?
142 million.
Sorry, I was off by
but there's a reason you were off. 142, and then they said, okay, well, this is a complex building. Let's put a factor of safety in. of 1.85. So that 142 becomes 228 million. And that's a healthy factor of safety, right? Like it's almost double. We don't do contingencies in terms of double anyways. So it's now 228 million. If that's not enough, the government asked those consultants to add another 40% on top of that. So now we're up to 369 million. You know, the math is crazy. You don't use these kind of factors. I don't know where they get this math, but that's the number they're throwing around. And they also then, I mean, there's great articles that I got this from. Elsa Lam from Canadian Architect has been amazing.
Fantastic.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
She's put all this together, and she debunked the cost that they assigned to building a new science center, which is, you know, it's going to be way more than they estimate.
Yeah.
You know, and somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 to $600 million that building's going to cost. Considerably more than repairing the existing building. Even if you take their number of 369, it's, you know, it's ludicrous. Everyone's fooling themselves if they think that we'll get a new science center for cheaper.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
I agree. I think that we as a community need to take heed to some of the topics that we're discussing, some of the ways that we can come together and advocate for the importance of maintaining this incredible institution. And hopefully the government will listen to the outcry of the people that elected it or didn't elect it, one of the two, but to the people that it serves, because it is a vital piece of experience in architecture in the city of Toronto, to the province, and to the country. If you have dreamt of or planned on coming, I mean, some people dream to come here, but if you're planning to come to Toronto, I can tell you that it is a sad state of affairs if you have a family, because driving past the Science Center yesterday, they have fencing up surrounding the entire place. They've got security there. It's a really sad
It's very sad. What's even more sad is that they've laid off, and they said they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They've laid off, I don't know how many, but I've talked to some of them today. It's devastating.
Brian, I have to say, I greatly appreciate your time, especially given the lack of time that you and I had to prepare for this, given the timeliness of the matter. I really am appreciative of it. So thank you so much for joining and providing the background, the knowledge, and as a collective with the practice, donating your time towards this previous to the statement and an ongoing effort. I'm available to help with resources in any way that I can. I know that I'm only one person, but it's one additional person, and I'm sure that others will say the same.
We've already had a big response this week, so yeah, things are growing fast. It's great. It's really encouraging, and you're going to do your part. You're going to get this out, and you're going to spread the word, which I'm sure you already have. So
yeah, I will definitely.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.